Hello everybody. So today I'd like to talk more to the side of my timeline that pertains to going to visionary state. And so far I've shared quite a bit about that. If you go back to the JodyVision, a big chunk of that is the stories about me going to visionary state, and most of it seems to have something to do with Bill Leeb. But this is one of the few times where it did not have any, I don't think it had anything to do with him at all actually. So now, when we look at my past events, briefly, I'm going to say it started in 1982, and that's where I first saw Rosey and Howard Clearlite, as well as Bill Leeb. And quickly, I'm just going to show this picture of them. So it has a little bit to do with Rosey and Clearlite. So this is them probably at least 1998, somewhere between that and 2008. I'm not really sure when this was taken, but they created their own Christmas card to send out to their family. And so it's cool because now I was first introduced to those guys in the visionary state in 1982, and I thought Rosey and Howard were my mom's friends. You know, they just seemed like maybe a hippie couple, or maybe, for all I know, was going to get their pot. I had no idea, but my mom was the one that went out and made friends, and my dad's more the hermit, and he didn't bring very many friends home. So I remembered Rosey and Howard as if they were real people, and I just thought they were friends of my mom's. And so in this vision, and so in 2006 I started training with a guy named Roger Brochman, and when I was over at his house, I must have went into visionary state, and so he showed me a couple of things that Howard had made, and he took me for a truck ride. So we were going to go train at some park outside in Westminster, Colorado, and that's where I went into a visionary slip. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, because as I was saying, so I kind of wanted to recap how, when I first met Rosey and Howard, and for that period of my life, all the way till I was about 18, I was having visionary state experiences without knowing it, until my dad asked me if I remembered my little friend from down the street who would have been Bill Leeb. Then I started thinking about it, and that's where I started thinking, well, there is a chance for that case, that that was maybe the first time I realized I could have been going to visionary state, but I put it in the back of my mind and kind of forgot about it again for a long time. And so I had a few visionary slips coming up on 2000, where some of them were pretty significant, and one of those was with Rosey, and she gave me some input and direction, which led me to contact Bill. So I thought Bill and Billy might be the same person. And so the contrast is that, I got to be really close friends with Rosey, but not necessarily with Billy. Howard, I met him a few times, but then he died before I came up here. Otherwise, I probably would have known him longer. Okay, and so anyways, in 2000, when I call that the big reveal, that's when I went from early November of 99 to the end of January 2000. I stayed there until the first week of June. Then I came back to November, and that's when I had to relive it. And that's where I started to understand this is what's been happening to me all this time. So it was like, boom, it was a lot being dropped on me. So very heavy time for me. And of course I had to go through all that without Rosey, because I lost her contact information until about 2002. Then I got a hold of her, and then I was able to ask her all this stuff, and she's never been to Key West and doesn't know Bill Leeb or anything. So that's how I got more confirmation that it was just a visionary thing. And so that in part encouraged me to reconnect with her, probably, similarly like with Bill Leeb. The main reason I've continued to reach out to him is because I was motivated by meeting them in the visionary state, and similarly with Rosey, we had lost contact. I was really wanting to get back in contact with her, because I did realize I met her in the visionary state as well. And so we have a good friendship, because I can talk about anything I want. I can tell her all the weird stuff that happens to me, and she knows what I'm talking about, and she has something that's similar to share with me. And so me and her were staying in touch, and so by 2005, if you saw my last video, she sent me that postcard. I'm just going to show it in mirror vision, but when she sent that postcard, that's when let's see here, when she really planted the seed of me starting to think about moving to Montana. So that was a 4-year cycle. Took me 4 years to actually arrive here. And so the very next year, so I've been training at Shaolin. I think I must have took a break from Shaolin and started training Kung Tao Silat. I met this guy named Will up in Boulder because I stopped in to eat at this Chinese place right off of Broadway. So I can't think of the place, but I bet everybody that lives up there knows what I'm talking about. There's just this one good little Chinese place. You walk in and order kind of like out of the, from behind the glass. I just dump it in a plate for you. But yeah, really good place. And so just meeting him was super special because I started training with Will and he was showing me. See, I'm already familiar with combined Tai Chi. I've seen a little bit of Yang style, a little bit of Chen style. Not really good at any of it, but then he was showing me Wu style. And I love that because, you know, earlier on I had a fight with one of my cab customers and I did movements. So if you know anything about Kung Fu, oopsie daisy, I'm running things over with my vehicle. So let's say I was standing. If you know Tai Chi, we do this movement where you kind of make two big circles and then press through. It's called white crane circles, the circles its wings, and then block past the knee and press. Now, I was in a fist fight with somebody who was trying to put their hands around my neck because I fell down. I was trying to stand up, and I did a big circle with both hands, block past the knee and press. And it worked, by the way. So so it's kind of cool getting that confirmation. So I'd gone off and I learned a bit of Wu style Tai Chi. I didn't retain practically anything there, but he took me through some really cool Shaolin stuff. He took me through some Xingyi. Actually, I remember a little bit of the Xingyi, but the Tai Chi, it was really insightful to see some Wu style Tai Chi. So me and him would just meet up and go to the park. You know, it was kind of fun. I'd get on the bus and go to Boulder, and he wasn't charging me. He was just really grateful to have someone to train with, you know, because to be able to share the material with me, help keep him pumping, you know. And so Will was a really good student, and I think he was more advanced than I was. Now, I mentioned about Will in my past videos that he has a criminal history, has been brought up in the Miami area and lived like a gangster lifestyle. He's been on a lot of street fights and he's been to prison. And ironically, somebody that really loves rap music, right? So he also liked punk music, so that kind of gave us a crossover because he was a tripper, so he was still okay with smoking pot and tripping. He had that mentality, but he was also caught up in narcotics, like particularly cocaine, and that's when he wanted to leave Boulder because he was in trouble with some people. I think he wasn't able to pay them for some coke, right? So he was always worried about someone trying to shoot him, and I had him come and stay with me after a while because he thought if he got out of Boulder and came to Denver, he could give himself a new start. And so I really wanted to give him a chance. So I talked a little bit about in how my last video, me and him ended up in that apartment where it had like its own, we each had our own bedroom and bathroom and had to share the kitchen. And that would have been great if that worked out, because Will was really helping me improve my martial arts a lot. And so one of the guys he was training with was named Roger Brochman, and he taught up in Thornton. So that's just north of the Denver metro area. Like, you know, it's like all kind of connected. Like, it's still kind of part of the Denver metro area. And, you know, sometimes what I do, I just did this once or twice maybe, is I took my bicycle up there, and after class I just rode it all the way back to Denver. Because they've got a really nice system of paths for bikers, people on bicycles. So Denver's a really neat area. A lot of interesting people. Now, the mystical part is before I met Roger Brochman, I had this flash that, you know, I was thinking, I just wish I could meet the right teacher, the right guru or something. And I don't really like the word guru so much, but it's a term they use in this system to describe somebody who teaches, you know, somebody that's a really dedicated student who teaches. And so I imagined the possibility of meeting my teacher up in that area of Thornton, so that's kind of interesting. That I had a flash of the map and I could just see his location. Then I ended up connecting with him, and he was teaching in his backyard. He lived at his parents' house, and he had the basement turned into his living quarters where his bed and his desk and everything was. And, you know, so he had a very extensive collection of staves, as he calls them. He likes to cut and prepare his own staves. By the way, almost forgot to mention, this one is a 6-footer. So in a Shaolin, we cut it like this, like maybe that much. But I didn't cut it. He made this about 6 feet. He's the one that added the red and white tape, and it's been the same tape since 2006 at least, because it was fresh when I got it, and he's also the one who probably put this on. Now normally we would sand some of this off because you don't want this, you know, hitting your hand, but I don't know if he might have shaved it down just a little bit, but it's just perfect. It's such a perfect piece. Now some rattan is made for, or not made for, but you know, there's different grades of rattan, and in order to use one for your weapon, you have to have a really good one. Otherwise, a lot of this rattan goes to furniture is not this good, and a lot of times thinner, but this is a really good one. So Shaolin like this, it's really not the same thing as wood. It's really a piece of grass. You think about it. So this and what's the other thing? Bamboo. Bamboo's not as good a weapon other than maybe practice, you know, but because it breaks and it has sharp ends and it doesn't really have a lot of power to it. But this is solid, a solid piece of grass, and so normally there'd probably be leaves growing off of where you see these knuckles. And see how it's flexible? So that's super important. So like a lot of martial arts that have staff training, they're using like a piece of hardwood. So you know, it was enlightening to me when I came to Shaolin and learned about this. And so Roger likes this too because he's very knowledgeable, so he likes both. There's like other kinds of wood, you know. So anyways, he also gives them a mineral soak, but these colors here represent kind of the martial side and the healing side. So martial and healing, you can kind of imagine, you know, red a lot of times we associate with the heart, you know, that seems to be where our passion comes from. So, but we need to be good at fighting, we need to have a good amount of passion. But on the healing end, you need the wisdom. So the wisdom's going to come down through your crown chakra. So that's what we call, you know, the general direction of heaven and God and all that good stuff. Now, when I was over at Rogers, so I think before I went to Rogers and had the vision, I might have had one with Will. So I think I had one with Will. Boy, I don't remember what order they were in, but I'm going to tell the Will one because I think it was pretty brief, you know, because me and him went off walking one night and I must have went into a visionary slip. Now I'm going to say is I thought I was never going to have visions again. I thought they quit coming. So like 2000 is like when I had the last noticeable one. 2002 might have slipped on another little vision about Bill Lee. When I thought I saw him as a teenager, like it kind of slipped in there and just kind of went to the back of my mind till later. But it almost seemed like it got super quiet until 2006. Then I started having visions again, and in this case, now Will knew somebody named Rosie back in Miami, so I don't know if he had an Aunt Rosie, but he was telling me one day he had this Aunt Rosie. He thinks, you know, he went to he says like, wow, I went to my Aunt Rosie's and she poisoned me, and I was kind of getting the impression he's talking about visionary state, and somehow I felt like it had something to do with me because later on, I think, you know, I felt like I was getting sick at Rosie's for some reason. I don't know if it was something in the food or if it was because she was giving me this sinus medication. I was having sinus problems, and that medication could have had a side effect that is similar to like methamphetamines, because when you go to pick up this pill, you got to show your license because people who make methamphetamines collect it. So in reality, in 2009 when I went to Rosie's house, I did feel like something was making me sick, and I didn't know. I started wondering if she was doing something to me, so I really had some trust issues there, which I'm not sure. I don't think she was doing anything to me. But just that notion was presented to me firstly, and then another time we were out walking around Denver, I went into a visionary slip, and then we were in Big Fork, and he was showing me the bridge where we jump off into the river. And there were some people coming up the bridge, and he's like, come on, hurry, let's duck, and we went under the bridge together. So I think me and Will went under the bridge and smoked a bowl in the visionary state, and that's all I can really remember from that. So that was a quick glimpse of, so Will was a guy that was probably like just a little older than me, just this really skinny Puerto Rican guy. He's pretty much white, you know, with dark hair. He had a little goatee, short hair, and light eyes. He has had really pretty blue eyes, but he was brought up with the Cuban upbringing in Miami, but was somebody I could unusually make friends with, you know, and he had the right intellect, and we had a good time when we were friends, by the way. But anyways, by introducing me to Roger, now Roger was super knowledgeable, you know. He said, you know, he's like a very intellectual, well-read kind of guy, and he had some programs he created depending on the kind of student you are. You might be a scholar warrior, you might be somebody that just wants to be super knowledgeable as well as well trained. But I don't know what the other one was, just a combat warrior, or just somebody that wants to learn to train. You're not trying to scholarly or anything. But the odd one, he probably said I'm the only student he ever had that qualified as a mystic warrior. So I'm a mystic warrior or a warrior priestess according to his how he labels me. Okay, so along with that, you know, we had a lot of discussion more onto the side of how psychic awareness weighs in martial arts, you know, and one of my favorite terms that we get from the Indonesians is ilmu, and that's when an object contains memory. So I think that was an important lesson because I inherited some weapons from Howard Clearlite later on. So one day over at Roger's house, he wanted me to do an assignment where, you know, I go down to his basement apartment. Now he's living in the basement of his parents, and they let him teach there. And by the way, you know, we did some of the training downstairs in the basement, but a lot of the training, we called it outdoor training. So we would go out in his backyard for a lot of training, and you know, so we'd go through like movements and techniques, but sometimes he just had me do a lot of crazy exercise, like just take a really big rock and throw it across the yard, or he'd throw like a tire and I'd punch it out of the air, and then we'd take like a big log and just run it and toss it. So he was teaching me a lot of cool caveman training. So just very enlightening and very knowledgeable training with Guru Brochman. Okay, but again, he had the bipolar disorder, and he was getting kind of mean to me. You know, he's getting angry with me, trying to punish me, and that's why I quit going. But I can tell, like, I don't know if it was like if I lasted a year with him before I bailed out, but it was like once a week, you know, and I don't know if I made it every single week for that year, but it did add up as far as you know, I definitely take a lot of things away from that training, but this day was particularly special. I think I've been coming long enough to kind of get a feel for Roger, you know. And this time he asked me to just go downstairs and sit down and do 100 breaths. So what I did instead, I did 108 breaths because I really like the number 9 and I like numerology. But I did the breath training because I already know breath training anyways. So I just took the assignment. I went down to do my breath training. And then it seemed like after that, that's when we started having a discussion, and he said that he has a friend named Howard, and he's worried about him because he would see him training all the time, but then at some point he didn't see him anymore, and he was wondering what happened to his friend Howard, you know. And so this was in visionary state. He started talking about Howard. Now the connection in the future is I made friends with the guy that lived across the street from Rosey, and he said pretty much the same line, that he would see, he was wondering what happened to Howard because he'd be outside training with his weapons, but then all of a sudden he just wasn't out there anymore, because what was happening in reality is Howard was coming down with prostate cancer, and it had him in a hospital bed. So that's the correlative there, that same line being used. So this is what happens in some of my visions. Those lines I'll hear in a vision will come true in reality. So it was funny because Roger was talking about Howard as if they were friends, but in reality they did not know each other. So I've had these ever since I trained with Roger in 2006. What is it, 2024 now? So these I bought because they're not even a pair. They're as close as I can get. One's a little thicker than the other, so I call them my yin and yang short sticks. And these are Eskrima or Kali. You want to be able to swing it like a helicopter without hitting yourself. That's what the length qualification is for these. So these are excellent practice weapons, but they're really light and they're not too threatening. I mean, I honestly wouldn't want to get beat with one of these, to be honest, but you know, when I showed these to Roger, you know, that's when he kind of made me realize these are probably more for practice than combat, because what you really need is something like this. Now Roger had another weapon very similar, which was probably one that he made, because we were having a discussion on, like, you really need, like, if you're going to use a short stick, it should be something like this. See, it's kind of thicker on one end. Now, when Roger showed me this weapon in the visionary state, this just seemed like something that was very typical of him to have around, okay? And so he told me that Howard Clearlite is the friend of his who made this weapon, and you really need to pay close attention. This weapon is made out of driftwood, so it makes the wood extra dense. It's kind of porous. So I think this is one of the neatest weapons I have. As basic and as crude as this is, it's honestly one of my favorite things. Even though I have tiger hook swords, and I have the Chinese iron fan, and I have nunchucks and all kind of things, I rate this as absolutely one of my favorite weapons for a number of reasons. Now, Roger said pay very close attention to the symbolism. I have never untied this, even though I was recommended to try untying and retying the knot. So the knot symbolizes two things. So this could represent the circle because it goes around, and this could represent like a cross shape. So those are two very important symbols all across the world. For like the example that the circle is the representation of heaven or spirit, you know. So it's the circle of life. So we hear the circle of life everywhere. Everything needs to have a circle. But the cross is a lot of like a lot of times you see them together, or even as part of the swastika. You know, it's that central power is the conscious presence in the universe. So that's where, like, I'm just gonna grab this because I think this symbol is a very good example of where that idea is used. So for furline assembly, they use a circle, but if you see this, this is kind of like that cross. Now I don't have one with me, but a lot of times you see like Indian art, it'll be a circle with a cross through that. So that's a very good symbol. A lot of times they call that a medicine wheel. So a medicine wheel because it combines the male and female divine. And so like everyone has this symbol around the world. I think everybody likes the circle and the way they use other symbols, and like so just think the pagans probably appreciate the four direction symbolism. The Indians, the Native Americans, obviously that's where you see that four directions. So the four directions in that case, you know, so that adds a little magic to this weapon. So it's not just a knot to hold the piece of leather on there. So, you know, there's a couple different ways you might use the leather. I mean, I don't know if it's the most sturdy thing. Like it could break, you know. So I don't know if that's how you use it. Like I'm not really sure what the whole point of him putting this on there is. But my favorite way to use it is to wrap it around and make a grip on it. So if you had time by any chance, that would be fine, you know. But I really think, you know, I'm not really sure what to do with this other than the fact that he had gone and tied the knot in such a way that it does provide kind of a, you know, a magical symbol that that consists of the circle and the four directional cross. So anyways, in reality, in 2009, after I moved to Big Fork, I found a few weapons laying in the corner behind the front door, which is typically where we end up keeping things, right, that are people who are martial artists might keep. Like my stave is always by the front door or the back door, mainly so I can grab it on the way out, but you know, who knows, maybe you need it to ward off some vampires or some zombies, you know. So anyways, that's when I found this weapon. And then she said that, you know, by the way, Howard was hoping to let me have those weapons. He said, you know, let Jody have the weapons I made. So that's according to Rosie. And so when I was sitting here looking at it, she gave me the same exact lecture that so Roger Brochman gave me a lecture about this knot. She gave me the same exact lecture, and she explained how it was made out of driftwood. You know, when they lived down in Texas, they lived in Freeport, Texas. I think they'd go to the beach and collect driftwood. So now, me and Roger took a truck ride. We went over to Westminster and went to some park I'd never seen before. And if you go up on the hill there, you should be able to see Stanley Lake, you'd think. So if you're familiar with the area. But we went up on that hill, and it turned into the hill that was across the street from the high school in Big Fork. All of a sudden, it just like, I don't know how we did it. Like I just turned around, and next thing you know, I was seeing Flathead Lake. Like, so I was standing in Westminster, Colorado one moment, and in a flash, I was in Big Fork. I was standing on this hill. So if you know where the high school is, it's like across the street and like kind of like just to the west of that football field, and looking out at Flathead Lake. Obviously that's a much bigger lake. And so Roger asked me, now do you know what lake this is? I'm like, I would assume it's Stanley Lake, but it just seems so much bigger. And he's like, nope, that is Flathead Lake. And we are in Big Fork, Montana. Now, I can't remember exactly what order it went in, but at some point, you know, like, so he had his truck parked across from the high school, and he took me around the block. So he took me over to Electric Avenue, and I think we drove around the block, and he showed me Rosie's house, and he said, "This is where you will live someday with Rosie Clearlite." So he actually showed me in 2006 where I would be living. And so again, it's just something where it just sort of slipped my mind. Like, I went to Visionary State while I was training with Roger one day, and it's just amazing, you know, how you know, we started out, he just had this like big blue pickup truck, and I remember we rode it over, you know, we went up like 92nd Avenue in Denver, rode it over someplace, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but there's just this big park with a long flight of stairs, because what he did was he had me carry a staff with buckets on either side, teaching me old-fashioned Chinese people training, right? But that's where I don't understand, you know, we get all the way to the top of this place, and somehow I turn around and boom, I'm in Big Fork, Montana. And the other thing he said, so I think when we got out to hike, so I just don't remember, you know, the order, like how we went up that hill and all that, but I just remember him letting me use this staff. Now, this was a half staff. That means it should come up about halfway on your body, but there was a knot right here before the rest of the stick, and I took it outside and hit the bag and broke the end off. So I'm the one who flattened that out and tried to like whittle it down. So now it's more of a walking cane. So when I stand up with this weapon, it's a perfect walking cane, you know, from my hand to the ground. If I want, I can also probably add a rubber end to this and use this as a hiking cane, because it's a very powerful weapon for the fact that it is made of driftwood, so it's condensed, it's more dense wood, and it has a little bit of a heavy end on it. Those are a couple of my favorite weapons, because I inherited those from Howard Clearlite. So again, this is where I feel the fun in, say, you know, I've been going to Visionary State all these years, and that's where I was introduced to Rosey and Howard. So they look very similar. I will show you one more time who I'm talking about. In the Visionary State, you know, Howard had more hair, and I have some other pictures of these guys when they're younger, and it's really amazing to me because Rosey had really long dark hair and he had long hair. And I almost thought, you know, like, so Rosey and Howard only came up a little bit, like, so I went over to Rosey's house a few times in 1982 in the Visionary State, and a little later on, me and my sister were doing naughty things like sneaking out of the house. And there was this guy that looked like Howard parked down on the end of the street. Like, if you go down, like, and if you're on Big Coppet and those, like, numbered streets, there's, like, 2nd and 3rd Street. They just kind of go down and they dead end at the ocean. And so sometimes people just sort of park there and sleep in their cars, you know. And there was a guy that looked like he could have been Howard. And so I remember my sister telling me, "You see that guy? You know, that's Howard. He's been keeping an eye on us." And I was a little bit worried that he might tell on us, you know. So when I did move to Big Fork, Howard had died of cancer. Actually, he was dying of cancer, but he died of a heart attack. So as long as I was with Rosey, she kind of had a similar mentality that he had crossed over, but, you know, he was around and he was keeping an eye on us. So I almost felt like Howard was a spirit guide to us for just a little bit. And kind of in recent times, since Rosey and Gary passed over, I haven't seen any super crazy phenomena, just a few good dreams. But I always kind of feel like they're watching over. So Rosey and Howard have been like really special guides in my life. So like so, you know, seeing Rosey in my visions, there wasn't like a huge bunch of emphasis on Rosey. And then later in life, in 1996, that's when we first met. And we met because she was looking for someone to buy pot from, and I was friends with the people up the hall. But then she started going on about her psychic awareness stuff, and they're like, "Ooh, you gotta meet Jody." So I got introduced to Freya first. So her daughter Freya was dating David, who was somebody that I was kind of like seeing a little bit. Like, me and him have kissed a little bit, but we didn't, you know, turn into sex partners. But it seemed like I was kind of almost his girlfriend. But then he met Freya, and it was kind of better off because I don't think David was a good fit for me. He's just kind of a cute guy. And then, but because, you know, he met Freya, I met Rosey in 1996, and we stayed in touch, and I'd go up and see her in Conifer. And then she moved away, and she was broken up with Howard. They would like break up and get together. I kind of think Howard was the most significant relationship she had. So he was the guy who was the first white American Zen Buddhist monk to run a Buddhist monastery at Tassajara. So one thing I really hope to do is be able to get out there and visit that. So, you know, these weapons, and I have his painting. So I have a few things that were once Howard's, and I'm not sure if I have his ashes or not, because we had a trailer full of stuff get stolen and it might have been in there. But, you know, I was really going to see if I could gather up some of Howard's stuff, and if I could make a trip to Tassajara, I'd like to see this monastery and see the plaque with his name on it. So that's where they get the name Clearlite. So anyways, this is just an interesting part of my life because, again, I was making a major transition and kind of learning to live on rolling rocks, but at the same time, by staying in martial arts, I really think it helped me to keep some balance. And so I was training with Roger until I couldn't take his temper anymore. And so it's interesting because the point being is, when I was training with Roger, he had me in what he calls his Mystic Warrior program. So maybe this was meant to be part of my confirmation in life, that I'm just more of a mystic type of person in general. And that's where, you know, all my life I've been experiencing, like, seeing some weird things, like I call the hang-on. I think some of the stuff I've experienced is kind of normal stuff, like a lot of people can attest to, like deja vu, astral travel, premonitions and dreams. But I think going to visionary state is kind of rare, and you don't meet very many people who have that. But that's something that Rosey can relate to, is she met her second husband in her visionary state experiences. So when she met him in reality, there was an unusual sense of familiarity with him that almost made it seem like they had it kind of had other people turning their heads, like there was an unusual funky connection. And of course, so her second husband, I think they had a pretty great marriage. But the third relationship, the third marriage, it's funny, she was married back to back somehow and just made the right connections, and she's almost gone most of her life without ever being single, right? But Howard was definitely, I felt like he was the man, like that was like her ultimate connection. So I think, you know, she's an old soul, and so what I've learned from her is you may have connections with more than one person that is super significant, because before she died, she made the connection with Gary. So I think, you know, from 2013, and they both died in 2022. So they've known each other a good solid 9 years, and it's almost like they were married. And they had a pretty good relationship. But when I look back at Rosey and Howard, I feel like that was like the ultimate connection for Rosey, was being married to the Zen man. And she was the yogini, so she was always a student of yoga. She'd had some aikido, and they had both. So I think she'd seen a lot of the stuff Howard does, because, you know, they were living in Texas. They were doing a lot of training right there in their house. So Howard actually trained a lot. So I don't know where all he get his training, but it sounded like he was good at some type of a Kempo style. So probably because he mixes Kung Fu and karate, you know. And so that's where, in reality, you know, Howard had put in some time out in the yard training with these weapons. Now I have another one. It's like it's called a bokken, so it's like a wooden version of a Japanese katana. Now the Japanese katana seems to be something that's very original to Japan. It's almost a straight sword with one side is a blade and the back side is not, and so you could either thrust it or swing it like a broadsword. So in Tai Chi we use something very similar. The Tai Chi broadsword is really kind of a long, skinny sword, but it's made of we use like lighter material, so it's more flexible, where the Japanese sword is very stiff, okay, very rigid. Now I was going to get back to is, for example, if I had the katana, you know, I've had some training on how to move a Japanese sword, and I felt like when I take that out in the yard and move it around, it's almost like it was feeding me, you know, like it's kind of like how we have instinct. So instinct is the information that's built into our DNA. That's where, like, you know, animals don't need sex education to reproduce, and animals don't need kung fu to fight, because that's instinctual to us, right? So instinct comes from the actual material you are made of. Now intuition comes from the spirit energy, the energy around us, and how we can receive and send energy. Information through energy. Energy is almost like just how radio waves work. So when we think stuff, it goes through the spirit energy. So what happened with these weapons is it saved up Howard's movement. So like if I take this weapon and I move it around, I might actually be repeating some of the stuff he is without really thinking about it. So I might know what I know because I've been doing Kung Fu, so I might do a bunch of stuff I got out of Kung Fu on his weapon. But then I start doing stuff and I feel like, you know, especially on that Boken, I feel like it automatically makes me want to do it like that, because now that's what Roger's lesson was about when he introduced me to these weapons. He explained to me what Ilmu is, and that's when an object retains memory. So it's almost like the material itself. So that's where a psychic detective gets their work done, is let's say the walls of this house contains all the information in here, and let's say they're trying to research something like a tragedy. There had been some violence, and maybe there had been murder. And the psychic detective can come in here and they can get, like, maybe if they just ask themselves what exactly happened, the material in the walls is holding the impression of what has happened. So everything works like a computer chip. So your brain is, it's biotechnology. It's specifically here to serve the purpose of acting as memory and information and all these things. But then the things around us, like the physical matter, acts a little bit like a computer chip. It remembers things. And then the energy that everything is, you know, so the energy and the matter combine, you know, because matter is made of energy, then energy is a component in itself. It acts as a conduit for information, kind of like radio waves, kind of like, you know, Wi-Fi. It's almost like an invisible optical, like, you know, those optical cords, you know, information goes through the air and through the matter. So not only is it stored, but it travels, and that's how we can know things that are also remote to us. So like going into visionary state and seeing Rosie's house and seeing these weapons. For example, like 1982, going into visionary state and meeting Rosey and Howard for the first time. And then later I see pictures of them and they look a lot like, in the visions, they look a lot like they did in the pictures, you know, so it's very impressive. And so that's where, you know, the mystery of my visionary state had been Bill Lee, because he's off limits for a number of reasons. So he's not somebody who I can easily communicate with. Otherwise, I have requested that he tries to look at his older pictures and see if there's any pictures where, you know, because I described him as letting his hair grow out and having it curly in the back, and I haven't seen any pictures like that yet, but he has posted a couple of pictures that that show him at a young age. So he's kind of the mystery person in my story, where Rosey and Howard was great because I actually met them, we made a good connection, and it seemed very profound just for the fact that I knew her for the last 13 years of her life, and the responsibility somehow fell onto my shoulders. It's a two-way street. It sort of was bestowed upon me, like I didn't know what I was asking for when I came to Montana to live with Rosey, but because I cared about her, so she naturally cared about me, and that's why we became such good friends. And then when my mom came up, she kind of adopted my mom as her little sister, so that kind of made Rosey my auntie. So when Will started talking about his Auntie Rosey, she kind of became my Auntie Rosey, and we were using that, you know, when we joined the Prospectors Club, to make me part of their family, so they could pay a family membership fee and include me, Gary, and Rosey as a family. And so I've taken on the name Clearlite because I'm still paying the bills in her name and everything until I can get out of here. So I feel like I've become part of their family inadvertently. Like I was even told in another vision that I'm going to become their family or inherit her name. And so that's a matter if I chose to do so. I don't think Jody Clearlite really has a good ring to it. But yeah, so there's something very special about having known Rosey. And so I did some videos about her early on. It was my little joke, is that I had a fairy godmother and a leprechaun. So Gary was a lot like a leprechaun for a lot of reasons. And she's like my fairy godmother because I kind of felt like she always believed in me. You know, she gave me empowerment, you know, really helped me to see the good in life, really helped me to see the good in myself. So anyways, you guys, I really thought this was an important vision to share because it gives further proof. Like, I don't have a lot of proof other than my stories, and like if you can just take my word for it. But like to me, in 2006 I was introduced to this weapon. I even had them explain the meaning of the knot. And then when I met Rosey, when I met this weapon in 2009, and Rosey was telling me that these are gonna be from Howard to me. He wants me to inherit his weapons. He really liked me a lot, and he really, you know, I actually took Rosey and Howard to meet my kung fu teacher, Grandmaster Tay. You know, so I kind of feel like these guys are part of my martial arts and my spiritual type of side of my family. You know, they kind of help. You know, like I feel like in the most of my life has always been, I've had an attachment to music culture that I think weighs heavy on the intellectual side and on the psychedelic side, and I feel like meeting Rosey and Howard are kind of like the yang to my yin, or the yin to my yang, one of the two. So that way, you know, so not only did I have a good friendship here, a good meaningful friendship, but it was very educational. That's always been Rosey's gift, that she's like having a teacher. So she gave me an education in exchange for me just being like a companion to her and helping her just get through her life, you know. So by coming up here, it kept her from being alone. She pretty much has lost most of her friends, and a lot of her family didn't have anything to do with her. So even though she's got a lot of family, I was the person that took care of her to the end of her life, and I was the person that ended up with all her stuff, and I've been having to, you know, deal with all that. And so everything that was hers is mine now. And so it's up to me to decide what I'm going to keep and let go of. And so, like, I've let go of a lot of things because I'm not into weaving, so I've had to let go of all the weaving stuff. But stuff like this, I mean, getting this and those weapons, and let me see, the book on theology, you know, so this is where I came in part. I really needed to change my life. I was ready to, what you call, get the heck out of Denver and do something different. And I think a very important part of coming to live with Rosey was to get an education to do with everything I talk about, you know. So it's been my life study, starting with paranormal activity and then moving on to spiritual understanding, because it kind of goes hand in hand. So instead of being a Bible person and going to church, my path of spirituality has been through discovery of spiritual phenomena in my life, or paranormal phenomena in my life. And so when Rosey died, I was really frustrated. I'm just like, what am I doing stuck here in Montana? Like, I feel like I'm just stranded here with no help. And so I've had this year or so to process it. And now that I've settled down and I feel like everything's been under control, I can look back and say, you know, I was actually granted a very profound gift by coming to Montana and spending those last 13 years with Rosey. So I'm so excited that about this visionary state experience. I think it's one of the most colorful ones where, okay, so to repeat what I've said, you know, both Will and Roger Brochman, so they called him Guru Brochman, he showed me Big Fork, Montana, like approximately 3 years before I would move there. So Roger took me in his truck. He showed me the house I was going to live in with Rosey on Electric Avenue. He showed me the hill I would go up later. So I was going up that hill and I was flashing back, and it was what was helping me remember. And I just happened to have that very staff. That's the one that Roger told me he wants me to use, that staff. And he also explained it was one of Howard's creations. Now, when I did move to Big Fork again, the neighbor across the street said something similar to Roger, like he would see Howard out there training all the time, and then eventually he just quit training. It just seemed pretty sudden. And since I've inherited Howard's weapons, just like Roger was teaching me, it has Ilmu. And I think, you know, that even though Howard has died and gone to the other side, I was still able to learn a little bit of martial arts from him inadvertently by training with his weapons. You guys, thank you if you're still listening. I hope you enjoyed this story, and hopefully it was a break from the usual. So you guys have a good day, and I shall talk to you soon.